Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Westminster. I'm sure you'll have a very good, productive session. Just as a matter of interest, who was here a year ago? Just quick hands up. Okay, so about half of you. So you'll have heard what I had to say about Brexit then. I'm afraid inevitably I might say a few words about Brexit now, now that it is a reality. As I understand it, what you're speaking about today is leadership in business. Now, I'm sure there are huge parallels between leadership in business and leadership in politics. And I guess the starting point for leadership in politics has to be a vision, having a vision about what you are trying to do and where you want to go. And I suppose that is the first point, the first reference really to Brexit. In that if there was a vision for Brexit, it was that it was a very short vision. It was a vision that said that we were going to regain control, we were going to secure our borders, and we were going to get rid of red tape. So the vision was, I would say, a very limited vision. And I think if you're to provide leadership, to have a vision, you've got to have something behind the vision. You've got to have worked out what that vision really means. And I suppose most important of all, if you've got a vision about what you want to achieve, you've also got to have an action plan for actually getting there. It's all very well having a nice a mission statement or a vision for a company or indeed for a political party. So our vision as a party is to supplant the Labour Party as the main opposition party, to challenge the Conservatives. And I think the by-election result that we've just had, and I apologise if I'm a bit bleary-eyed, confirms that we are, if not back in the game, at least now in areas where we are strong, we are able to get very good results. In normal circumstances, overturning a majority of 23,000 is not something that is easily done. So I'm pleased that we were able to do that. So we've got an action plan about how we're going to get there. And the results that we've seen around the country in terms of council election results is the start of that plan in actually helping to deliver the vision. But in relation to Brexit, what was the plan? Well, we now know that there wasn't a plan at all, that beyond the slogans, no work at all had been done. Neither by the government, because the government, I think, were worried that if they did actively go out to civil servants and say, please start to work up a plan of what happens immediately post-Brexit, that would immediately have been leaked. And therefore it would have fed a story that the government are on the run, that they're worried, and therefore the government did not initiate any work in relation to Brexit. And nor, as far as we can tell, did the leading proponents of Brexit separately or individually conduct any activities, work out what they were going to do to deliver their vision of what the UK should look like in 5 or 10 years' time. And in fact, if they had a plan at all, it seems as though it is rapidly unravelling, because if you look at the recent statements that we have had from Boris Johnson, now bearing in mind that probably if there was anything that was consistent about the Brexit campaign, it was that people did not favour immigration. And of course, we've just had record immigration or record rise in number of migrants coming to the UK. If the campaign had a slogan that was more widely or more loudly spoken than any, immigration clearly was the one that was most resonant. We have now had our Foreign Secretary going around to talking to European ambassadors, saying that actually he is in favour of freedom of movement. Which was the main feature of the Brexit campaign. It was, we're against freedom of movement. We have our Foreign Secretary telling ambassadors that he is in favour of freedom of movement. Another key feature of the Brexit campaign was that we did not want to give our money to the European Union. Even though, of course, in some cases, when it's things like European scientific projects, for instance, very valuable to the UK, where often the UK is the leading player. There are very good reasons why, in fact, we would want to contribute money. The Brexit position was, we're not going to contribute a penny to the European Union. Well, now, of course, we heard from David Davis yesterday that, in fact, he would, of course, very sensibly envisage situations where the UK government would want to contribute, because if we want to continue to be part of organisations like the European Aviation Safety Agency, we are going to have to contribute financially to it. So I think he is starting to recognise that is going to be a requirement. And I suppose so. In terms of leadership, you start with a vision, you have an action plan, and then you have to have leadership capabilities. And in politics, I think it's slightly different to business, because in politics, we have to rely very heavily on volunteers. You as businesses don't have to do that. You have people working for you who, within reason, will do whatever you tell them to do, more or less. In politics, we don't have that. We rely very heavily on volunteers. So in Richmond Park, last weekend, we had probably about 1,200 people campaigning on the streets of Richmond Park. 1,180 of those were volunteers. Probably 20 of them were members of staff. So we have to provide leadership, we have to be able to demonstrate, and I think this is, again, probably slightly different to business. I have to be able to prove to the people who I am asking to go out and work for me on a voluntary basis, yesterday at 7 o'clock in the evening on the streets of Richmond Park, where the temperature was about -5, and they needed to go out and knock on doors and get people out to vote, I had to demonstrate to them that I was doing that myself, that I'm able to do anything, so I'm not asking people to do things that I don't expect to do myself. So I was out there, I did 5 hours or so in the minus temperatures, and by the time it got to about 8:45 or 9 o'clock at night, I thought, even in Richmond Park, a very nice, safe neighbourhood, people are probably not going to want to continue opening the doors at that time of night. So I don't know what you're going to find in terms of what you think is needed in leadership in business, but clearly I'm sure it'll be consistent with the things that I've just talked about in terms of having a vision, having a plan, and actually having the leadership skills that people expect from someone who is going to provide leadership in their businesses. So I think that's probably enough from me. I hope you have a fantastic day. I'm sure for those of you who haven't been before that this is a really valuable occasion, a really important networking opportunity. And also, given the importance of Brexit, and I apologise for those of you who voted to leave, who may feel uncomfortable with what I've just said, but whether you did or you did not, one of the things that we are trying to do is to get as much information as we can from business about the areas where you think action needs to be taken and or clarification needs to be given. For instance, Vince Cable spent a couple of days last week with the international travel trade. And they know that for them as businesses, there are probably 3 or 4 EU regulations that are critical to their business for them to be able to continue to do business effectively in other EU countries. And they need clarification in those areas. And I suspect for your industry, exactly the same will apply. You will know precisely where within your industry there is a need for the government to clarify, there is a need for the government either to, you may feel, to scrap EU regulations, or alternatively, you may feel there's a need for the government to keep them. And we're going to go through this process of what's called the Great Repeal Act, or the Grand Repeal Bill. And as part of that process, the first stage of that will be to incorporate into domestic law everything that has come to us from the European Union. Although it is not as straightforward as that. So when you hear government ministers saying we're simply going to absorb into domestic law, that is not the simple process that they believe is going to happen, because there are many areas where in fact you can't do that, because it doesn't make sense, for instance, in some cases to absorb into domestic law something that applies to the whole of the European Union. But there will then be a stage, once that is completed, of the government going through all of the legislation, or most of it, that's been absorbed into domestic law, and then looking at the legislation and trying to work out whether, in fact, yes, we do want to keep that, or alternatively, we absolutely don't want to keep that, or alternatively, we want to keep half of it. And you can imagine, given that there are probably 7,000 different pieces of legislation that are affected, you can imagine how much work there's going to be for civil servants and city firms to try and work out, to unpick this huge legislative bundle and work out what we want to keep and what we want to get rid of. And as I said, you will know more than anyone else how this affects your businesses and what you want to see retained and what you want to get rid of. And I hope that you'll, perhaps not as part of today, but you will liaise with PPMA and make sure that that information is channeled through so that I can raise it appropriately and see if we can get some clarification for you. So that's it from me. So enjoy the rest of the day, and I'm going to go away and celebrate a little bit this evening as a result of the rather good result we had in Richmond Park. So thank you very much.